Okay, it does look like most people have gotten logged in today, so we'll go ahead and start the session for today. Again, thanks for joining us. The session today is creating your test security game plan. Next slide, please. I'm very pleased to introduce my two colleagues that will be presenting today. First of all, Dr. John Freemer is the president of Caveon Consulting Services and one of the founders of Caveon Test Security. He has over 50 years in this field and has spent all of his time for the last 12 or more years helping clients prevent and detect cheating on high-stakes tests. Also, Dr. Jamie Mulkey, our Vice President of Client Services. She consults with a number of different Caveon clients to help address test security issues. She's a test security veteran also who's worked in the field for nearly 25 years. She's worked on many boards, has published articles on the topic of test security. And she holds an educational doctorate from the University of Southern California. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Jamie.
Thanks, Rochelle, and welcome everybody. For our agenda today, what we hope to accomplish is to help you look at your test security best practices. What are those policies, procedures, and practices that you have in place? We also want to describe what we think are kind of best in class. What are those things that you should have in your organization? And that includes things like key roles around test security, documents, practices, security incident response planning. John will also talk about some important resources that you should have on your bookshelf. I'm also excited to be talking to you about our new recognition program called the Caveon Seal of Excellence, and I'll be talking about that a little bit later in the webinar. And lastly, we'll just kind of summarize some key points and then open it up to questions. So right now, I'd like to open up our first poll question. And the question is, compared to 5 years ago, is the time that you spend on addressing test security issues much greater, slightly greater, about the same, slightly less, or much less? So go ahead and please select one. The polls are now open. We're about halfway through. This is going to be a very interactive session. I will tell you, there's probably about 3 or 4 polls, so good stuff to keep you engaged and awake. Looks like we're just about completed with voting. Let's go ahead and show the results. So really interesting and maybe not surprising is that people are seeing or having more test security issues than they were seeing 5 years ago, and so that's, I think this is a good timing for a good conversation to kind of understand, what are those things that you need in place to shore up those test security resources. What I'd like to do now is turn the time over to my colleague John Freemer, and he's going to talk about some best practices with you.
I'm pleased to have the opportunity to participate in this webinar. Invariably, the people who sign up for one of our webinars are very busy folk, so we all try to do what we can to present information that will be useful to them. And in this segment, we're going to talk about the practices that we think that regardless of your program and its stage of development, that you ought to have in place. And the first of those is you ought to have a formal written security plan or handbook, a document that anyone could go to who's associated with your program and read the latest up-to-date information on test security. To the extent possible, we advocate preparing that document so it can be shared outside of the group that's managing the program, the other stakeholders. There may well be things that can't be fully shared. Exactly how you handle a security incident, for example, you may not want that to be publicly available, but if you write your handbook properly, that can be a separate section that you access and you can make the rest of it available. Every program that we've worked with where they didn't have a handbook and we were advocating it, they had some of the things that you ought to have in the handbook. Your important policies regarding test administration, your division of responsibility when there's indication of some kind of irregularity. In every case, we find some of the things that people need to have in a handbook available, but they aren't formalized, up-to-date, and documented, and we think that's a critically important step. Next slide, please. Turn now to the processes by which you develop tests. Often when we talk to clients or prospects about working with us, and we want to talk about secure test development processes, their minds go to an important issue, how they transfer items from one place to another during development, how they get them out in the field. And those are indeed important, and you want to make sure that they're locked down as tightly as you can. But our way of looking at things is you should go right to the start. When you design your program, you ought to be thinking about security, and the decisions you make about the types of items even that you use ought to have test security in mind. It's very much harder to retrofit and introduce an item type that may have significant security advantages if you haven't built into the design the capacity for using such items. The environment for developing items, exactly where are they developed, who develops them, who has access. You have need-to-know rules so that people only can access things that they really need to do their work, or are you still kind of as a carryover from the past, the higher your rank, the more access you have, even when often the highest ranking folks in a large organization don't have any need at all to access items, and they shouldn't want to. They should rather see them only limited to people who need them, and only limited to the type of items that you need to have. Who do you use for your subject matter experts, and how do you use them? How do you vet them? And what do you do to control their access and stop it when they're no longer working? And what are the item management processes that you're pursuing? Making sure that everyone has access to the most up-to-date rules can make quite a difference. Next slide, please. The area of test administration in every program that we've worked on is the area where the greatest numbers of test security problems occur. It's sort of logical. You go from a planning and test development group that are sort of part of the family. They're professionals at this. This is their work. And then those items and tests and item pools, excuse me, go out into a much larger group, and all kinds of people have contact with them. And often they don't have the same training or commitment that those who made the tests have. So there are a number of key elements of this. How do we know that the person who's sitting for the examination is indeed who he or she claims to be? That, I think, is one of our success stories in the test security world. I think we do a lot better job than we did even 5 years ago, certainly 10 years ago, in checking and training those who are doing the checking to make sure that it really is, that's Jamie Mulkey and that's John Freemer sitting for this test, and they should worry if the person who says he's John Freemer has very long hair and a very feminine-looking silhouette and just doesn't look like he could be the person whose picture is on that so-called secure driver's license. Proctoring policies. What are the arrangements that you've made to make sure that there is watching going on at all times? I happen to be a casino gambler. It's not exactly a confession, it's just a description of how I spend my life. And I think of it like what happens in casinos, because there's so much money moving around all the time. There's those who are doing the work, and those are people watching them, and the people watching the watchers, and the people watching the watchers. And in addition to in-person watching, there are cameras, there are roving people. That's almost the model I think we need in proctoring. We need to have it understood that whatever you're doing, someone might come along and check on you. We need to be sure that the people who are doing the proctoring are trained, and in some cases, programs have developed certification processes to make sure that they were originally trained and they've kept those skills. And we need to have monitoring in place before, during, and after testing. If and only if we do all those things can we have some confidence that secure test administration is what's going on. Next slide, please. We are very strong advocates, and I think you can see some evidence that we and other factors have had some success in that the title of security coordinator or security director or vice president of security is showing up in job descriptions, and it's showing up when we visit places and look at their materials. An individual who has responsibility for test security. In a small organization, initially that tends to be an add-on. You know, it's the person who's also responsible for other things, but at least it's specifically called out that that's the test security guy or gal. So if you have a question, that's the person you turn to. If you're a manager and you want to know if you have the best processes in place, that's the person that you turn to first. And in significant size testing entities, that moves fairly quickly to become a full-time position, and in some cases a whole department. I think the largest number of people that I've heard about, I believe that I heard that at ETS there are 61 people involved in following up on test security issues. That's what Ray Nicosia said at a conference, and he's usually a tremendously dependable source of information. And largely, the last thing I want to talk about is CESP certification, Certified Exam Security Professional Certification, which Jamie has also mentioned. This is a place to show that you have the skills and get that added to your LinkedIn profile, to all of the ways you present yourself to the world. I have it myself, so does Jamie. I think it's going to become a standard in our field. Next slide. If you do not have a formal, written, approved, vetted, everything that you would want in an important policy, security incidents response plan, you need to have one. You need to have a place where people could go that explains exactly what we do in our organization when there's evidence of a testing irregularity. So we don't know if it's a breach. Irregularity is sort of the most broad term, but something has happened that shouldn't have happened. We're kind of worried about it, and we need to figure out how to handle it. And if you have such a plan and all the right people have reviewed it, you'll get consistent approach to handling it. And that's really important. Most breaches do not end up in courts and lawsuits, even though they do cause us a lot of difficulty. But if you ever get to the end of the road and you've found a real misbehaving person and you want to take action, if you didn't follow a consistent methodology in dealing with the infraction and the breach, you're going to have a great deal of trouble. You may be dead in the water in trying to proceed. And that plan will have protocols if you get to penalties and consequences. You know, it's sort of thinking through in a calm environment. What do we want to do if this happens? What do we want to do if that happens? In a program that's been around a while, you build that out of what you've done in the past. How did we handle these minor incidents? What did we do, heaven forfend, when we ran into a really big one? I think we're ready now to go into another poll. Jamie, are you doing that, or who's handling that for us?
I'll read it, John. So this
Sure.
poll is, in which of these areas have you suffered a security breach in your organization? Test development, test administration, leaked items through the internet, or physical security at the testing organization? And you can select more than one if it applies. So we'll give you just a couple minutes to vote. Okay, most people have voted. Let's give you 5 more seconds. Okay, let's go ahead and share those results.
So this is interesting and maybe not surprising, is that where breaches most likely occur, and this supports kind of our findings as well, is in the area of test administration. And a second runner-up is leaked items through the internet. So yeah, it's kind of interesting to see this information and to get your feedback on it as well. We can kind of see here also that physical security is also a concern. So really good information and helpful in understanding, knowing where those problems are so that we can kind of plug those holes. Why don't we go to our next slide now? And John talked about best practices. I'm going to be talking about kind of some key roles in your organization that you should identify. And the first 3 are in the areas of management, budgeting, and analysis. So as John talked about, having that individual responsible for test security is important. This person can either have the title of Director of Test Security, or it could be part of some other responsibilities that they have within the organization. But the important thing is that you have an individual in your organization that is the go-to person for test security. And this is not only when something happens, but just from an information standpoint, making sure you have information ahead of time that that person is available. Secondly, in terms of budgeting, you want to make sure that you have funds available for test security activities. And these can be things like making sure that you have a reserve form, or some people call it a breach form, of your test. And this is in the incident that your original form gets breached, you have something to go to right away. You have another form in reserve that you can use to deliver your exam. And this budgeting, from my perspective, this could be budgeting for external services, but it also could be just budgeting for internal staff that will be providing some of these test security activities. The next one is making sure that you have some type of statistical analysis or data forensic analysis to help detect irregularities. And again, this could go out to a third party, or it could be done internally. Even if you have something as simple as, looking at similarities of item responses, looking at response times, looking at very high scores, just some basic elements that you can detect whether a problem is going on or not. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide. Another important point is making sure that you have resources available for monitoring the internet. And this is looking for potential disclosure of your test content. And then if you do find your content, sending out some type of formal notification asking that that content be removed. So it's always a person or a role that someone is being diligent about continuously monitoring so that you can make sure that your test items are not being leaked. One of the things you want to do in your organization is raise the awareness about the level of test security. And this is to promote an environment of test security, to make all staff aware of it, so that you're always thinking about it in the work that you do. And so ongoing training is going to be important. And then lastly, when there is a breach, making sure that you have strong processes in place for investigation. And this could be first-line investigations where you're collecting information in a systematic manner so that the next step in the process can be taken. Let's go to the next slide. So as John spoke of also, a really key important document is going to be your security incident response plan. And these are what we feel to be the key components of the SIRP, making sure that you have agreements in place. And this is agreements for candidates, it's for vendors, it's for contractors. So you're stipulating in the event of a breach, or making sure that people aren't sharing items, aren't selling items. You're putting that into your agreement. And then that falls nicely into the policies that you have in place so that you can make decisions about how to handle individuals or organizations that when a breach does occur, that you can rely on those agreements to make decisions and take action. As we talked about, having practices in place for analysis and monitoring. And another really important thing is having an incident response matrix. And what this is looking at kind of all the potential breaches, the type of incidents that might occur in test security, and looking at what your response will be. And what this allows for is that when a breach does occur, you can go to your matrix and say, aha, this candidate was caught cheating. Our response is that we're going to invalidate their test, and they're not going to be allowed to test for the next 6 months. So it allows you, one, to have a consistent response from an ongoing perspective. You want to be able to describe how investigations will be managed and who will be involved. So that includes not only the investigative strategies, but also your communications plan. So, you know, what is communicated, who needs to be communicated to, and when does it need to be communicated. So moving now to our next poll, Rochelle?
Yeah, so we'd like to know how many of these processes do you currently have documented? You can select all that apply there, and we'll give you just a minute to vote. Okay, about 10 more seconds. Looks like most people are getting their votes in. Okay, we'll go ahead and share those results with you.
Well, this is great. So a lot of you have policies in place and investigative strategies as well as agreements, and really important stuff. It's good to see the response on this. What I'd like to do now is turn the time back over to John, and he's going to talk about some resources, some important resources that you should have available on your bookcase.
John, we cannot hear you. I don't know if you're still muted.
Yeah, that was one of the disadvantages of learning how to mute my phone, is I also have to learn how to unmute my phone. Thank you for the warning.
No problem.
I actually went for years with a phone and didn't bother learning how to mute it, but I'm that kind of technology person. So the Handbook of Test Security is something that each unit of a place involved in serious testing should own. It's a book that I co-authored under the senior editorship of Jim Wallach of the University of Wisconsin. So I'm advocating something that I had a hand in, but I don't stand to gain anything from that. Both Jim Wallach and I and all of the chapter authors donated our royalties on an ongoing basis to the National Council on Measurement in Education. But I think it's if you only could have one book to cover all of the aspects of test security, that would be the book, in my judgment. The other documents, which you will get a subsequent mailing from us that would tell you how to access them, but I want to say a little bit about them. They're mostly from professional associations. The technical issues in large-scale assessment guidebooks are two documents prepared for state assessment directors through the Center for Chief State School Officers. There's lots of specifics in there that have come from states. We had work groups of states, and they shared materials, and I think it's a very nice place to see pulled together what different state assessments have learned to do. And in some ways, states are ahead of lots of programs, particularly things like annual training of everybody who's involved in testing. That's a standard in state assessments. You wouldn't think of having a program without doing that. The National College Testing Association recently put out standards, and they're directed at folks in institutions running testing operations at colleges, community colleges, and the like. And one of their benefits is they're quite new and up to date on technology-related things. International Test Commission has issued their own standards related to security, and the international part is what makes me recommend that. And let's try to learn from others. We don't have to develop all of these things ourselves. Caveon webinar series, many of you know about. I think that's a very convenient way to catch up on things. There's actually just one NCME white paper put out, this 2 or 3 years ago now, but has lots of good advice. And the last one is, the full title is Operational Best Practices in State Assessment. The most recent edition is specifically for technology-based testing, and it's a collaboration of the Association of Test Publishers and the Center for Chief State School Officers, particularly state assessment people associated with the center. So I think you should have the handbook. I think you should have a sampling that's appropriate of the rest. And as I've already said, learn from others. I tell this to my grandkids now and said it to my own kids. Make new mistakes. You don't have to make the same mistakes everybody else makes. Learn from them. So I think I'm ready now to turn back to Jamie.
Thanks, John. Well, we are really excited to announce a new program. It's the Caveon Seal of Excellence Recognition Award. And this is a quality assurance effort to help improve test security within testing organizations. It really signifies that the organization exemplifies best practices in test security and identifies and recognizes the organization as being best in class. So I'll talk a little bit about how organizations earn the seal and what the benefits are of the organization and what are some of the criteria that we look for in getting the seal. So, an organization must meet certain criteria in order to obtain a seal. And there's kind of a couple different ways here. One, you had to have had a Caveon security audit within the last 2 years. And in conjunction with that, we're looking at making sure that organizations have certain criteria in place. So when we do a security audit, we know that most organizations are lacking in a way in terms of the materials, processes, and practices that they have in place. For example, most organizations don't have a well-documented security handbook or security plan. So in conjunction with doing the security audit, we want to make sure that you have things in place like a security plan, a security incident response plan, that you're doing media and web monitoring, that you're doing some type of statistical analysis or data forensics, that you're doing first-line investigations. So those things that we've mentioned in the previous discussion or earlier discussion. So I think it's also important to note here that that we are endorsing test security best practices in policies, practices, and procedures. And it's not to say that because someone earns a seal of excellence that they're never going to have a breach. But if breaches do occur, we feel confident based on the platforms and policies and practices you have in place that you can manage that security incident well. So the benefit to the organization is that you can use the seal of excellence, and this is a representation on the slide right here. You can use it on your website. You can use it as recognition in email signatures, maybe on your letterhead, to help let other organizations know that you follow good practice when it comes to test security. Let's go to our next slide. So how do you know if your organization is eligible? Well, I mentioned that you had to completed a security audit. If you are an organization that maybe you're saying, well, we're getting ready to have an audit, or we had one several years ago, then what we'll need to look at is the things that those pieces that we talked about that you have in place. But it'll be kind of a fee-based review to make sure that you do have those mechanisms in place. So you could have had an audit, let's say you had an audit 5 years ago. We would come in and do phone interviews, look at your materials, and then provide the award based on making sure that you have those things, those criteria in place. Each seal is good for 2 years, and so the same thing occurs. If you want to maintain that seal, Caveon will come back in and do a fee-based review so that you can maintain your seal for the next 2 years. So we're very excited about this new program, and we invite you to, ask us any questions that you might have about it. If you think you may be eligible, what you need to do to successfully receive this recognition for test security excellence. We're happy to be available to answer questions about that. When we go to our next slide. So I wanted to kind of summarize some key points. We know that many organizations have some elements of test security in place. And what we invite you to do is kind of check your strengths and weaknesses. Where do you think you're strong in terms of test security, in terms of policies and practices? Make sure that you identify key test security roles in your organization. Who is it that is your go-to person for test security? Make sure that you have strategies in place, response planning, so that when a breach does occur, you have a plan for managing that, that incident. And lastly, just consider obtaining the Caveon Seal of Excellence for your testing organization. It's really something that not only promotes the importance of test security within the testing industry, but could also be a feather in your cap as a testing organization to say that you practice good test security best practices. And with that, we'll go ahead and open it up for Q&A.
Yeah, so if anyone has a question, please go ahead and enter it in the question box. I do have one question that came in here. It says, I think we have strong test security procedures, but how can I learn if they are as strong as they should be?
Right, so, sorry, Michelle, I'm sorry.
I just said we'll kick off with that one.
Okay, great. So again, if you would like Caveon to come in and do an evaluation of your procedures, one of the things we would recommend is probably doing a security audit to take a look at your processes and procedures and policies so that we can give you feedback on your strengths and weaknesses. I think that would be a good first step.
I might make the comment, Jamie, to the folks who are attending. We have learned over our 13 years that it is the people who feel that they have a lot of good processes who ask us to come in. So it's people committed to continuous improvement and getting better year after year that want our help. So it makes it a very enjoyable process for all of us.
Okay, thanks, guys. Here's another question for you. I'm not clear on a security incident response plan. Can you please summarize that again?
Okay. So what the SIRP is, or the Security Incident Response Plan is, it's a mechanism for managing test security incidents. So let's say that you get a call from maybe your testing center saying you've caught an individual trying to steal a test booklet or taking screen captures of your items. So rather than saying, oh my gosh, what do? We don't have any processes in place, it's really putting down those policies, I should say, procedures for managing those incidents. And it's really understanding, doing some brainstorming with your organization, say, well, what are the types of incidents that we have? And we talked about some of those things earlier. Actually, the question around where do you see the most type of incidents occurring? And we know that test administration, for example, is a big place where incidents occur. So it's understanding what those potential incidents are. It's putting policies in place to address those incidents. It's making sure that you have agreements in place with candidates and your contractors, so that when something does occur, you can manage that incident, and you can use your policies to direct an action, to take action. John, do you have anything to add to that?
I sometimes think of the situation with respect to fire prevention. My dad was a New York City fireman, and we had fire drills in our house starting when I was around age 7 or 8. And growing up, I would ask him, you know, obviously it was my dad, whatever he said was right. That's the way it used to be. But his theory was, do your planning when there's no smoke, when there's no heat, when everybody's calm. And I think it's that way with security incidents. You're going to make a much better judgment if you can think it through without the immediate need of deciding, what do I do this afternoon, tomorrow, the next day. So I'll just throw that in the pot.
Thank you to both of you. So another question, you mentioned a number of test security resources. Where can we find those?
We're going to provide to you a listing. In some cases, it's as simple as going to a URL and printing it out. The handbook you'd have to buy or find someone that has that would let you have it. You could get it through Amazon. We'll give you access to each of them, and I'll personally say if you have trouble finding any of them, I would be happy to help you try to access them if the URLs aren't working or you can't get your hands on them, because mostly you have to reach inside yourself, and your colleagues need to work together to get the kind of security that you need. But any way that you can use an outside source to get you started, you know, to find a sample of a form that you realize you need, that's a blessing. And that's why I think use those resources or use colleagues in the field. There's a lot of sharing. A lot of my work in recent years has been with state assessments, and the state assessment folk do a lot of sharing with each other of how they've tackled a new problem, how we're going to deal with smart watches, let's say, or things of that nature. I think there isn't quite as much as that in across the certification industry, although you see it at Association of Test Publisher meetings, and there's a good bit of it in national testing programs. There's a lot of sharing among the different organizations. They get together periodically and share test security findings and challenges. So that's another place to look for help.
Great, thanks, John. And I'll just add to that, we will send you an email with different links to these resources and where you can get them. But you also want to check out cespcert.org and check out the resources page there, because in addition to the ones we mentioned, there are lots of links to white papers and articles and webinars and all kinds of things that you might find helpful as well. So, okay, another question here, just as a follow-up to the last question, those resources seem like they're pretty specific to education. Are they relevant to certification programs also?
The handbook is quite broad. It's not limited to education. It's true that many of the others are. I don't think we've developed as many in that domain. We're working on it. We'll have more. but I don't think we have as many. Education's been at it longer, and some of the big organizations in educational testing have been working at it for decades.
And I would just add that the resources that Rochelle mentioned on the CESP website, those are probably more general. There's some more general type of resources there that you'll find. There's, for example, there's a set of breach summaries, and it's 15 summaries of breaches that were discussed in the media. And so we do a synopsis of 15 different situations and how they were handled and what the impact was. And so it's a really nice little booklet that you can download and kind of glean and learn some information from that I think is universal.
It also occurs to me that the Association of Test Publishers Security Committee is a very good resource worth looking up and establishing contact. They have a pattern of producing good resource materials over the years.
Great, thank you. Someone is asking if there is a list of published list of CESP individuals to communicate or collaborate with. Where could someone connect with those folks and learn more about the program?
No, that is a great suggestion. I will take that back and look at that. We do not have one right now. We don't have a list of individuals, but yeah, let's take that back, Rochelle, and see how we might be able to make that possible.
Yeah, exactly. Great suggestion. You can also join the CESP LinkedIn group. That's not probably going to give you just the people who are certified unless they've added it to their profile, but it is a good place to network with people who are interested in studying for the program. So I think that's a good resource for you there. I can certainly send you that link, Joe. Someone is asking if that they mentioned they have a copy of the security handbook, the handbook of test security, but is wondering if it's been updated or if they're planning on a new publication anytime soon, Dr. Freemer?
If so, I haven't been consulted on it, so it might be that Jim Wallach is working on a fascinating new book with Greg Cizik. He's going in a different direction of evaluating a number of different ways of analyzing data from tests, same data sets, different approaches being used. So I would track that if you are interested in the data analysis side of things. I keep looking for a new book from Greg Cizik for his classic work on cheating, but he doesn't seem to be interested in doing that. Instead, he's working with Jim Wallach on this data analytic book.
Great, thank you for that information. I think this will be our last question. It looks like most of the questions are starting to slow down. What is the benefit of the Caveon Seal of Excellence to my program? How do you see that helping this program?
Well, I think one, we like to say that a rising tide lifts all boats, and this is really from our perspective, quality assurance in helping to improve test security in all organizations. From an organizational perspective, I think that allows you to say to your constituents that, hey, we practice good test security practices. We're an exemplar. We're kind of our best in class. And so it's a way of showing that you pay attention to test security and that you implement it within your testing program. And I think particularly if you are a test publisher or, an organization, I think it could benefit in a number of different ways. Let's say that you're a test publisher. I think it gives your clients peace of mind that you're paying attention to test security. I think from a constituent perspective, let's say that you're a candidate and you see this seal, it knows that it lets people know that you're watching and that you take it seriously. So I think there's a number of different perspectives that you could look at, but it really, I think, helps an organization think out is as best in class.
Thank you, Jamie. Okay, I think we'll go ahead and close the webinar for today. It looks like everyone has their questions. If we did not answer your question, we will get back with you either privately or through the email that we send out. So I'd like to just thank our presenters today, Dr. Freemer, Dr. Mulkey. Also, thank you to our attendees. We really appreciate your time in joining this webinar. And remember to look us up if you're going to ATP or at the NCME annual meeting in April. Thanks again, everyone, and look for an email with the recording and the slides from me in the next few days.